Okay.
Okay, good morning, everybody. As I said before, my name is John Hornby. I'm a research lecturer here at NHL Stendon. I work more recently quite closely with the Center of Entrepreneurship here. The center is designed to support students in entrepreneurial activity here, with a big regional focus on the north of the Netherlands and also around here in Friesland. We support students in not only starting new businesses, but in their entrepreneurial educational journey through a range of activities, everything from supporting them business registration through our Chamber of Commerce or the KVK, all the way to workshops, idea generation, and implementation. Today, I'm going to speak to you, however, about a slightly more nuanced topic, and that's basically entrepreneurial education. Together with the center, recently we did a reasonably large data collection in our university in which we investigated the effects of educational environment on the development of entrepreneurial mindset. And in particular, we looked at entrepreneurial mindset as a precursor, a driver, if you will, of entrepreneurial intentions through things like attitude, norms, and perceived ability. And in particular, there I'm referring to the theory of planned behavior, which is a well-known and well-trodden area, which I will come to in a few minutes. Pink Floyd said, "We don't need no education, but we do need to have experience, the kind that turns uncertainty into opportunity." And that's what we're going to look at here today. We're going to look at authentic work structure, reflection, and collaboration, things that move students from knowing to doing. In your recent assignment, also with Bauke yesterday, you have to write a 1,000-word piece at the end of the series of presentations this week. This presentation positions you in a way that you can try to identify parts or aspects of your educational environment that perhaps you find more important, or perhaps you may come to recognize certain aspects related to authenticity, collaboration, and reflection. These different aspects of the educational environment can also be used to show your strengths and weaknesses. So you can use those as a basis for further reflection and further learning. So it's important to understand these aspects and how this functions and may affect your entrepreneurial mindset. It is also perhaps good and meaningful to know maybe how other students up to this point also experience these different factors. This can be a rich and meaningful starting point for your educational journey to know how the education is supposed to function and perhaps even allow you to tailor-make your own experience. Sometimes things don't happen and sometimes they do. As future entrepreneurs, you should never undervalue your ideas. The potential for ventures is vast. However, statistically speaking, more than 60% of these will fail in the first year. Roughly 2/3 of the remaining 40% will also within 3 years fail. Unicorns, that is basically entrepreneurial endeavors that become highly successful, are in the minority. In fact, 1% can be really counted as truly massively successful. Think of the Amazons, the Facebooks, and the ChatGPTs of this world. There's roughly 1,200 unicorns worldwide in 2025. So the potential is small, but the reward is great. However, sometimes we cannot control the environment in which we operate in, and sometimes things happen for a reason, and again, sometimes they don't. But when they don't take it as a bad or perhaps something as a setback. For example, if you look at Google, Google was tried to sell itself to Excite in 1999 for $750,000. That sale never went through. Netflix was offered to Blockbuster for $50 million. That sale was also rejected and never went through, as the business idea was seen as non-viable at the time. Today, Netflix market capitalization is in excess of $511 billion. Apple in the mid-1970s tried to sell its iPhone 1 to HP, with 4 times being rejected by HP as a product that would never be viable. Kodak invented the digital camera but never used it. Kodak preferred to focus, for example, on things like films and lenses, but they never actually operationalized their idea. So sometimes things won't happen for you, and you may take that as a setback, but you can also see it as a blessing in disguise. The bottom line is that when you make an entrepreneurial venture, you will require two things: lady luck, but also you will have to also understand the environment in which you are in and be able to come back from what you may perceive at that time as setbacks or uncertainty. So what I'm going to look at here now today is how do we create, or how do we help students navigate these uncertainties? How do we create an environment or a mindset that students can, when they see or perceive things as perhaps not going exactly as they wish, how can they cope with these? There are different mechanisms, but today we concentrate on the one that we believe to be most important, and that is the entrepreneurial mindset. I'm going to look today at entrepreneurial mindset from a slightly scientific perspective. This perspective will involve me addressing things like theory, the theory of authenticity, collaboration, and reflection, and will also show you some statistical output. However, we keep this to a minimum, and the discussion is basically on the educational environment from an interpretive and worked experience. So how does it work? So I'm going to give you some background, first of all, about what we do here. Some of it may or may not apply to your current educational institution, but I'm sure there are aspects of it that you will recognize. Our university about 4 years ago moved to an educational approach that prioritizes industry partnerships. Those industry partnerships, for all intents and purposes, are what we call live cases. So in many situations, the university will recruit industry partners. They will agree a brief, and teams of 4 to 6 students will work on projects in cycles from 15 to 18 weeks as a standard. However, there are also other shorter collaborations, consultations, and we still continue with what we traditionally would have called internships or more longer-based industry consultations and industry partnerships. Roughly 50% of our educational program is based around this concept, so it is a substantial portion. And we, having looked at course prospectus and all the course outlines for our different schools and faculties, we have seen that it is actually maybe even in some cases slightly higher than that when you consider other externals like the Center of Entrepreneurship. So what do we know about live cases? Well, we know that live cases are a highly effective teaching method, especially when it comes to entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial intentions. But sometimes what we don't know is how do we create the educational environment and how to balance teacher inputs and educational inputs in order to ensure that we achieve these outcomes regularly. How do we achieve the outcome of educational mindset, and how do we align pedagogy with these intended outcomes? So in our institution, outside of these live cases or consultancies, we tend to try and fill perhaps cognitive knowledge gaps with expert sessions, which you will recognize as perhaps more traditional lectures and workshops. For example, financing, marketing, and HRM. Students then assemble a range of different artifacts, and these artifacts are normally put together in a learning portfolio, and we use reflections regularly. These reflections are generally structured. Part of them are covered in a portfolio interview, and these are used to verify achievement and learning. But we go back to the central question is how do we manage this educational experience? So we look at this in terms of how do we manage this educational experience from a quantitative modeling perspective. We're going to use, or the results that you will see today, is that we use what we call a fully latent structural equation modeling, and we dropped an exploratory research approach. We follow a theory by Radovic, which is called the MARC model, which says that more authenticity, more reflection, and more collaboration should result, or are theorized to result, in higher levels of learning and engagement. We operationalize this as the ALT scale, Sohenbrush, and Kemba for each of our authenticity, reflection, and collaboration. And we look at entrepreneurial mindset. entrepreneurial mindset is characterized by what Q and Bell call behavioral entrepreneurial mindset. For the purposes of this presentation, we will simply refer to it as entrepreneurial mindset. This type of entrepreneurial mindset and its conceptualization in this way is unique in that they believe that entrepreneurial mindset is a mixture of cognitive, behavioral, and competencies. Now, it was already touched on yesterday, and you would have seen it in the intercom model that was discussed in the session. So we then map that onto the theory of planned behavior, and this theory states that there are three precursors to people behaving in an entrepreneurial way. And that is explained through how a student perceives, or the attitude of the student, how they perceive others will perceive their endeavor, so family, friends, teachers, or important others. And then we have something called perceived behavioral control, or in this study, as we refer to as entrepreneurial ability. Okay, so this results in a number of different educational pathways. I mapped this model using authenticity, reflection, and collaboration as inputs into the entrepreneurial mindset. So that is the educational environment on the left-hand side, and those are our independent variables. Okay, these are mapped on to our outcomes, which are norms, attitudes, ability, and entrepreneurial intentions. And you will see in the middle, entrepreneurial mindset. So entrepreneurial mindset is the driver, or if you will, the black box that makes educational environment function or form or help to form entrepreneurial intentions. This is the core of our theory. That means that we hypothesize or we advocate that there are a number of different educational pathways that lead to entrepreneurial intentions. These pathways include the one through authenticity, mindset, norms, and intentions, and this can be mapped out. Each arrow in the diagram or conceptual model does represent a hypothesis. Okay, so what we are doing in that model is basically we are looking at how do we or how can we elicit through the levers on the left-hand side, authenticity, collaboration, and reflection, how can we use these different factors or these different aspects of the educational environment to create or elicit more entrepreneurial mindset? We do this through the three levels of authenticity, and authenticity is consequential tasks that require the involvement of many stakeholders and are used in the development of real-world problems and solutions for companies. This is important because the authenticity also helps students form or makes them engage in a problem in such a way or to such a level, it helps them inform their own entrepreneurial identity. It helps them to behave in a certain way, and on that behavior they may reflect. And on that reflection, they can develop themselves as an entrepreneur. Each of these factors, which I will not go into a large amount of detail here, is believed to affect entrepreneurial mindset in different ways. So for example, authenticity, we believe will have a strong relationship with focus yet adaptable, execution, and resource leveraging. This would seem logical, for example, in resource leveraging, where if you are faced with a complex real-world problem, it will need multiple inputs in order to be solved. You must deliver for your clients, and therefore you must execute, and you must be focused yet adaptable. As you will be dealing with a client, you will be dealing with other partners in your learning group or consultancy project, and you will also have to integrate that with the teacher and learning outcomes. Reflection, for example, is seen to be important, again, for focus on adaptability and execution, but also very much in terms of creativity. By thinking about new solutions and ideas, taking a step back and looking at problems from a different perspective, we believe this will foster and develop creativity. And finally, collaboration. Collaboration occurs not only among students, but with students and industry partners, and also between student and teacher and industry partner. Therefore, we look at this from the perspective, or hypothesize again, it will have an effect on mobilizing and networking abilities of the students. In saying that, many literature sources state that live cases and teaching through entrepreneurship is the way or the gold standard on how education should be taught or delivered. But it is not without some concerns. For example, reflections should be structured, right? You need to avoid overly overloading reflections at the end of a task. It should be continuous. You need something called scaffolding, which is support for students. And there are other outside factors like work experience, family life. All these different things can have different emphasis on the relationships between authenticity, collaborative, and reflective practices. So that begs the question, how much authenticity, reflection, or collaboration is enough? How much do we need to move students through the different cycles of experiential learning as, for example, envisaged by Kolbe? Now, everybody, well, to a large extent, it is believed that more authenticity, more reflection, and more collaboration should result in more entrepreneurial mindset, as a very, very simple explanation. However, we don't know how these should be combined, and we don't know if, for example, are there different effects of adding more of these components of the educational environment? Are these effects different, for example, males and females, or are they different across years of study? As students develop, do they require more authenticity and less reflection, for example, or more collaboration, more reflection, and less authenticity? So we also set out in this research to establish, are there ideal or are there specific combinations of these different elements that can help to optimize the educational environment? Which brings us to our next variable in the study, which is entrepreneurial mindset. So entrepreneurial mindset in this study, also you will see in this conceptualization of entrepreneurial mindset, a lot of the things that were covered yesterday, that you did some practical exercises on, basically the Entrecom model, are mentioned here again. These elements, creativity, networking, mobilizing others, resource leveraging, execution, and focus yet adaptable. Now, before we continue, it's important for us to establish what is mindset, or what do we define mindset as in this context? Well, here I position mindset as the mechanism which helps create entrepreneurial intention. It is a bridge between education and intention. I also believe that it makes education more effective. And in some cases, some authors have also just suggested that, in fact, education on its own is not a successful driver of entrepreneurial intentions, that you do have to have mediating variables in between, like mindset. What does it mean, though, to have a malleable behavioral proximal set of dispositional capabilities? That's quite a mouthful. So what that means is that when we talk about behavioral proximal, we talk about things that occur in your mind that occur one step before you actually act. They are real, they are part of your very makeup, and they are basically what cause you to behave in a certain way. They are not distant traits or general attitudes. They are not near action capacities. And they are defined as already illustrated, focus yet adaptable, creative, execution, networking, resource leveraging, and mobilizing others. However, sometimes these different things, these proxies to behavior or things that we believe make people behave in an entrepreneurial way, develop differently in different people. And sometimes education is effective in developing these and sometimes not. So what we say is that what really makes educational effective is that EM is the intermediate mechanism, or it is a translator of educational practices into beliefs, or a set of skills or behaviors, behavioral proxials, that then affect the intentions of students through attitudes, subjective norms, and behavioral ability. And we talk about serial mediation in that case. Okay, so basically, what we're saying here is that we wish to develop entrepreneurial mindset. We know that entrepreneurial mindset is important for entrepreneurial intentions and actions. but we don't know from educators' perspective exactly how that should be done. So literature calls for investigations of mediators and moderators. In this case, we talk only about mediators. In our larger study, we do use work experience as a further variable, but that will not be covered in this session today. Okay, so now I'm just going to dive into a little bit of perhaps more theoretical stuff. I'm just going to define very briefly our three variables: authenticity, collaboration, reflection, and then we're going to look at some actual results. So in our study and the way we look at authenticity, authenticity is the extent to which tasks, constraints, and feedback mirror real practice. So it's how students perceive or how closely they align what they are doing in an educational context with the real world. So they have real clients, real data, but they need to perceive real consequences from their actions. So authenticity in a baseline context is only actually ever effective or usable when students feel that they have real consequences from their actions beyond that of merely obtaining a learning outcome or a grade or any school-based outcome. So it raises the task value, it raises the accountability, and it creates a professional identity. It makes students act in a more professional way and provides concrete experiences for learning to occur, which means that it often occurs under deadlines, under pressure. You have access to multiple stakeholders, and you must deliver public deliverables, whether it's presentations, prototypes, products, or services. And it's also subject to external review because you have an industry partner. So we believe that authenticity is theorized to affect or develop a student's entrepreneurial mindset because it raises task value, it raises the importance of what a student is doing. It promotes accountability, it promotes professional identity, and it allows concrete experiences in which that context learning can occur. However, authenticity cannot be seen as something that occurs in a vacuum, and it cannot be seen as being always positive. For example, authenticity promotes uncertainty, and unless that uncertainty is well managed and scaffolded, students can become easily lost. Students can also see conflicting roles between what a client wants and their educational outcomes. And if the authenticity or what the client desires and what the teacher looks to assess are different, students may see that as unfair, or in fact, it may even have negative effects. So you really have to avoid the fake real, what we call the fake real in education. And it needs to make sure that it does not overwhelm the students, because after all, education is where people come to prepare for the real world. It is not the real world by definition. Okay, so outside of that, then we also have reflection. And reflection, you can see it's very much an individual, personal level thing. You do have group reflective tasks, but we look at it as an individual student activity, and we look at it from the structured perspective. So we look at authenticity as set moments that are part of your educational course. For example, writing a reflection in a portfolio or something to that effect. But reflection is very, very important because while you can be in an authentic environment and you can be engaged in real world practices and you can be doing consultancy projects and interacting with companies, that necessarily by itself does not mean that you learn. In order to learn, you have to reflect. You have to look at the experiences that you have over time, and you have to make judgments on those experiences. You have to find out, first of all, perhaps determine were they positive or negative experiences, but you do learn from both positive and negative experiences. So what reflection does, it's a process. You can almost see it as perhaps the oil in the engine. It's what moves a student after having an experience into a learning zone, something that they can reflect on and digest. It's very important, for example, in building metacognitive evaluation and judgment skills. It's been also important in the development of creativity, coming up with solutions. It also helps you build a personal identity around, you translate your experiences into things that become part of your very personality. However, again, reflection, sorry, next slide, please. Reflection cannot always be seen as something that only delivers positive effects. For example, you can become stuck in an overly reflective environment where you constantly think about things or constantly question them. This sometimes is called analysis paralysis, where you're continuously thinking about what possible outcomes could there be. And we all know that in life, perhaps there are an infinite number of outcomes, and you cannot account for them all. Therefore, the educational environment needs to be structured. It needs to offer guidance, and it needs to make sure that reflection is used in the correct way. So again, there are drawbacks and trade-offs from reflection and authenticity. And finally, collaborations. What does it mean to collaborate? Well, we talk about collaboration in terms of coordination in our study. It's deliberate teamwork. It's deliberately working together to co-construct knowledge, which often comes in the form of solutions or project consultancies. Okay, and it is very, very effective in previous studies at the development of perceived ability, also because students, by collaborating, learn from each other. Peer-to-peer learning, but also we should look at collaboration not only from this perspective. In our study, we also count collaboration as students working together with teachers, teachers working with industry partners, and industry partners working with students. So there is quite a complex network. So it can take many, many forms. You can look at, for example, something as simple as having a meeting or an interview with an industry partner, different approval checkpoints where you have to check in with industry partners or even with teachers. But it can also be more formal in terms of, for example, having to work on a group assignment that has an outcome or a grade. So we believe that this again develops entrepreneurial mindset, in particular, again, as I say, networking, mobilizing others. However, again, collaboration cannot be seen as something only positive. Collaboration has negative effects as well. And therefore, when we look at the educational environment, we must, as educators and as students, also be aware of the fact that, for example, collaboration can also negatively affect your learning and perhaps even the development of your entrepreneurial mindset. For example, risks in collaboration are social loafing. So students who will obtain the same grade as other students, however, put in less work. It may result in conflict. It may relate in overload, and it also may affect assessment and fairness more generally. But therefore, again, how we structure the educational environment, how we design it, and how we develop it needs to make sure that there's sufficient scaffolding, staged commitments, and the visibility of contributions are rewarded for the amount that a student actually contributes. Otherwise, it risks become a negative input into the development of entrepreneurial mindset. So that was the very theoretical side. That was how I have framed my model. That is how I have put together this study. Obviously, it's only a snapshot, but I hope that that gives you an insight into what we do here and how we think about the educational environment more generally. Educational environment develops mindset. Mindset has an influence on a student's attitude, a student's subjective norms, and a student's ability. And those three factors then affect your ability to act or your intention to act. To test our theory, we actually then went out and did some research. So we did a data collection here in our university. We ran a pilot study first of 150 students. We then looked at a full sample size, doing a priori sample calculation using a number of different online tools like D-Star Power and some others, also using rules of thumb. And in order to have an adequate sample size, which was recommended at 560 for our simple model and our higher order model at around 800, we arrived at a final sample of 793 students. Our data collection was supported by the Center for Entrepreneurship through promotional campaigns the provision of data collectors. We used flyers, posters, QR codes, and we had a reward of a raffle, which involved the use of vouchers in two forms, a dinner voucher with wine pairings for our student hotel, and some 5 vouchers for a major online retailer. We used a dynamic data collection methods, which means it happened in 2 stages. We collected data by sending an email to all students across the entire university through the university database. We collected that data, and then we balanced the group sizes because we also wanted to look at differences between males and females in different years through an in-person data collection, which happened across 5 different campus sites over a period of 3 months. Ethics approval was given by Oxford Brookes University, subsequently adopted by NHL Standard University of Applied Science, and that contained a data management plan, data collection plan, and various other aspects. So that's the nuts and bolts of what we did in a very brief overview. So here we come out with our final model. Here I have grouped the hypotheses together just for simplicity's sake. In the full study, there are 1A, 1B, 1C all the way through. But here I've grouped them into hypothesis 1, which relates to the educational environment, hypothesis 2, which is the relationship between mindset and the precursors to intention, norms, attitude, and ability. And H3, we have the relationship between norms, attitudes, ability, and intentions. And in 5 and 6, we have some mediation, which means that are the effects going through mindset and the other mediators, norms, attitudes, and ability, do they make education more effective? Are these effective bridges to translate the message from our educational environment into entrepreneurial intentions? Of course, as I've mentioned before, we also used age as a control variable, and we also had 2 study groups, gender and year of study, and I will address each of these hypotheses in turn. So H1, the educational environment variables, we forecast also directionality, positive influence on entrepreneurial mindset. We also said that entrepreneurial mindset will have a positive influence on the precursors to intention, attitude towards entrepreneurship, subjective norms, also again positively directed to entrepreneurial intentions. And again here we see entrepreneurial mindset to mediate and serial mediate. Based on the literature, we also hypothesized no differences in gender, which was also partly influenced by taking a very close look at the Dutch context in particular. So that must be noted that these findings, while important, are specific to the Dutch context. We do have international students, but here in the Netherlands, we have a very well-developed economy, and we have a very well-developed sense of support here in our university for entrepreneurship. And then we looked at the strength of structural relationships between different years of students. And on this basis, we theorized based on literature that we expect over years 1 to 4 for these effects to become stronger. In particular, we assumed that the effects of education are progressive. Hopefully, if we're doing it right, you get better over time is probably the best way to explain it. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this. This is the statistical reporting.
Sorry, Hans is asking something.
Yeah, please. Can I ask a question, John, in between? Yeah, because you're talking about educational context in the context of the Netherlands in which you did your research. Mm-hmm. I was wondering, because we have a lot of international students too, besides our educational method, does these, how should I put this, these different insights affect and different contexts from international students, but also from the educational system and the Netherlands? Does this affect the general approach of influencing the entrepreneurial mindset in a particular way in the Netherlands?
It was quite hard to model cultural differences. We did record nationality, but only around 18 or 19% of our Standard in general has around 25% international, something like that. So we had a very small group. So to do group by group comparisons was not purely because of our data set, not possible per se. But we were more interested in the educational environment, not really the cultural differences, but how the levers affected. So we did concentrate on that. But it would be possible to extract that specific data, and I'm happy to do that for you. I just did not include it in this presentation per se.
I understand that, of course, because this is a complete research, of course. But if you look at the outcome of your study, and we are, of course, we have the intention to change the way we want to influence the entrepreneurial mindset in our programs in the Center for Entrepreneurship. I can imagine other colleagues who are listening, perhaps at the moment, have the same question. For instance, for Spain or for Portugal or for wherever they are. How can you use those data to get the perfect educational method on spot of the university the students are working?
Sure. Yeah, no, so I think it's. I mean, this study can be replicated in any setting, and I would welcome anybody's interest in actually doing that. I think it would make for a very strong case to see if there are indeed cultural differences, because then you would have a very nice comparison between Dutch and another country, for example. And then even 3 or 4 studies in different countries would be absolutely amazing. So I think that is a very valid point. This does need to be replicated in international contexts.
Okay, perfect. Now we come back on that.
Okay.
Thanks.
Sure. So I'm going to run through quickly some results. This is, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. I can offer you or provide you with a full list of, for example, model fit indices and so on and so forth. Long story short, we had no multicollinearity issues. We were well within the tolerance. Our max was 4.3, our lowest 2.2, and the cutoff value being 5. We used Cook's D to check. We had no influential cases after the data had been cleaned. Common method variance. We did have a common method variance positive chi-square test for that model. However, we did expect some shared variance, particularly between our entrepreneurial mindset and our educational factors. So, for example, as I've indicated in the presentation today, for example, being collaborative and mobilizing others, one would expect some overlap in students' perceptions of what those 2 items might, or 2 constructs might mean. But the shared variance was below the standard threshold of 20% at 18.5. And we did model our entrepreneurial mindset variable as a second order factor. And that was in line with a theoretical conceptualization of that. When we added a common method biased variable, it did distort the model. So we ultimately rejected it. We checked for group invariance because we do between groups analysis as well. We had configural and metro invariance were supported. So we have good data for cross-group comparisons. Overall, we followed the recommendations of Klein and we also Gaskin, which I can recommend to any student who is thinking about structural equation modeling or introducing themselves to it. A great set of videos online, a great online course, and also I think that it's a very useful tool. So you can see then I also provided you with CRAV, MSV, convergent and discriminant validity checks. And as I say, all reflect CR value slightly low, 0.79, 0.8 normally the cutoff. But given the complexity of our model, the fact that we have multiple predictors, a second order factor, and serial mediation, and given that reflect a key variable, we retained it. We found it acceptable to retain it as a construct. So this is very basics, normal data. Mahendra's test showed no multivariate departures. And this is a brief overview of the different ages of our students, all in line with the university data that we have. So no surprises there. We try to keep a balance in our groups, for example, gender and age sizes. So, and also year sizes, because during group comparisons, we stick to the ratio of 1.5 maximum difference. These are our model fit statistics. Again, all reasonably good. You do see some CFI values again below 0.9. Again, given model complexity, or we weren't too concerned with that. We also can note that RMSEA, SMRR, and P-close are all above acceptable standards, and therefore based on Klein's recommendation of adopting a holistic view of your model, considering the type of research you're doing, which in this case is rather perhaps more exploratory than conformatory in terms of theory building, we have decided to retain these elements, and we believe that these model fit statistics to be a suitable basis for further analysis. Okay, so what did we find? So first thing that was quite surprising, when we got our final results, we found that attitude and entrepreneurial tension were very, very, very closely related in our sample. And that's what Hans mentioned there just a little bit earlier about perhaps cultural differences, but maybe also the environment that we have created. Holland, also if you look at things like the GEM report, but more generally the amount of money, 2% of GDP that the government invests in supporting young and new entrepreneurs. Banks are fairly open to it, so sources of financing are readily available. People who we found that from this from a data collection, that if students believe or have an attitude that they want to start a business, invariably they see that as the same as starting a business. They don't make a distinction between wanting to and actually doing it, having an attitude towards starting something and actually doing it. Now, in research in the past, attitude has been shown to be highly correlated with intention. Not normally the highest correlation, although it depends again which research you read. So they range from 0.6 to 0.8, but we had a 0.85, which we found to be basically conceptually the same. So that could be also, again, these are theorizations. We'd have to look into it in more detail. Perhaps also could be to do with the way the items were constructed, and also that we, in our educational environment and also using live cases, place a lot of emphasis on experience and also encouraging students, saying that if you believe you can do it, then you should do it, which is a very positive thing and a very good thing, and a very valid way to encourage and to build an entrepreneurial identity. But a word of caution on this part is perhaps we should also be cognitive as educators of providing or making a process in which students maybe become overly confident. Becoming an entrepreneur is a very difficult, it takes stamina, it takes a lot of commitment. So it shouldn't be underestimated. And at times, I think sometimes we see, for example, that perhaps we have a lot of entrepreneurial role models, and this also came up in the presentation yesterday, that these can also be maybe perhaps as role models overly romanticizing what it is to be an entrepreneur in the first place and how you get there. We should also make sure that we don't fall into a Dunning-Kruger effect style situation where we maybe overestimate how easy or how quickly we can become an entrepreneur. So I think we should do some further research on this, and we're going to start interviews with students shortly. And it needs balance between believing that you can do it and actually doing it, because they should be slightly separable things. I often discuss this with my student. Well, I discussed this with my students last week. When you take a big jump or a big leap into becoming an entrepreneur, it's a bit like bungee jumping. But if you stand on the edge of a bridge before you're about to jump off, even though you know you've got a bungee cord attached to you and you're not scared, then perhaps maybe there's something wrong. So we need to keep that balance. We need to say, listen, it's going to be uncertain. It may be scary at times, but you have the support, you have the abilities, but know that this is coming. So basically, taking attitude out of the model, because attitude and entrepreneurial intentions converged. So we could theoretically say that, or statistically say that they're the same thing. This is the final model that we developed, or that we were able to test, which has got some interesting findings in it as well. And then again, I say this is context specific to NHL Stendon. We're going to use this to guide how we develop entrepreneurial education within our institution, but it can be also readily applied to other institutions if we do the data collection behind it. So first of all, let me just quickly explain. The red arrows are paths that we found not to be effective. The red arrows show non-significance or very low valued and non-significant. So, which is quite a surprise to me, especially with authenticity. But I'm going to start first with, if you look at authentic collaboration and reflection, they have no direct relationship with entrepreneurial intentions. All three factors of the educational environment were non-significant. In fact, some cases slightly negative. So what that says to us is that educational environment or education on its own is not an effective driver of entrepreneurial intentions. And then if we go back up to the model and we look at authenticity, it also says to us the way that we are delivering at the moment, that authenticity itself is also not proving to be particularly effective. I mean, authenticity, though, one must note, is probably one of the hardest things because it's so subjective to create. But at the moment in our institution, we are, I don't think, fully tapping authenticity as a true driver of entrepreneurial mindset. When we look at collaboration, interestingly enough, it was found to be significant in our full sample. By the way, full sample are the black figures, blue is male and pink is female. And what we can see here is, and yes, ladies, you did hear it here first, males tend not to like collaboration. You'll see that 0.143 on the left-hand side there. It's quite well, it's a low beta value, but it's also non-significant. We found that females prefer collaboration with a medium effect size and it being a highly significant relationship. So then we have reflection, which also showed that, in fact, across all values, it was a medium to large effect size and all significant. The other ones to note, you can read yourself there, you see, is I have an arrow, a pink arrow from mindset to entrepreneurial intentions, a direct relationship there. That was found to be only significant for females. So females tend to see a direct relationship between their entrepreneurial mindset and their entrepreneurial intentions, whereas males do not. Okay. The most effective path is if you see reflection to mindset, mindset to ability. All students, male and female, have noted that mindset helps them to develop abilities, and those abilities translate into intentions. Now, the ability-intention relationship through meta-analysis and literature reviews has always been a strong one. So that's not really something new there. So gender and group comparisons. If you next slide, please. So basically, what we found across genders is that outside of that collaboration on the left-hand side, the main path to show this is that it was statistically different between males and females was the direct relationship between mindset and intentions. For most of our, well, for the majority of our other parts, there was no significance between genders, significant differences between genders. So basically what we found is that entrepreneurial mindset is a more salient driver of entrepreneurial intentions than for males. But in terms of other educational paths, from collaboration and reflection through mindset to ability, for example, you don't need as an educator, and there is no big difference between how males and females see that educational path developing. So now we look at the across year effects. Are there differences between year 1, 2, 3, and 4? And we expected to find a cumulative effect across study years, so that we thought that from year 1 to 4, perhaps the effect on mindset or the relationship between mindset and intentions would grow. We did not find that. What we did find is that, for example, we saw for collaboration, it had an effect in year 1 and year 3, but in years 2 and 4, all relationships and all paths were non-significant, which is quite interesting. So it seems that perhaps collaboration skips a year. So for example, if you come first into your university career and you start to collaborate, perhaps you find that collaboration useful and necessary. It then kind of plateaus out. Perhaps maybe students have enough of collaboration. And then again in year 3, it seems to again have an effect, except on the serial norms to intention behavior. And in year 4, again, we found no effect. Okay. And then we look at reflection. As I said before, reflection across genders and across years is the most significant driver of entrepreneurial intentions, and it has it's most effective in year 2. So it seems that year 2 students find reflection quite impactful, but also that of reflection also that we saw on the diagram already, the serial mediated path. So collaboration or reflection through mindset onto abilities, the creation of abilities to intention is the most effective path for the development of an entrepreneurial intention or prerequisite to act entrepreneurial. So reflection is the most consistent and the strongest driver of entrepreneurial intentions, both serially and singly mediated. All this time, also bear in mind that we found no effects for authenticity pathways. So in conclusion, authenticity is the context setter. We, as an institution, we need to work on that context setter. We're not fully tapping the context. Why? Obviously, that's not a question that you normally answer with quantitative. So perhaps that authenticity, the context setter, where we need to do more with that. We can't answer the question as to why students may not find it to be as authentic as it should be. That requires more qualitative research, I think. Collaboration in our study results we're framing as the capability engine. It's significant. It seems to operate in short bursts or in cohort bursts. But again, we can look at years 2 and 4 and why that may be the case. But finally, reflection is the backbone of the educational process here in our university and through the Center for Entrepreneurship. It really is the most significant and most important driver. In terms of gender, there is no real significant differences. However, if we see, for example, that female students do prefer collaboration more than males do, there are some basic steps perhaps we as educators should take, perhaps something as simple as group balancing when groups are formed for consultancy projects, and other recommendations that could be adopted. So conclusions, we need to double down on reflection as an institution and as educators, keep our clear criteria, make sure that they're well-timed, coach, debrief, talk to students, and keep that strong connection between reflection and ability. It's a really good driver of entrepreneurial intentions. aim collaboration where it works at years 1 and 3, but perhaps look at how do we span it into the other years, or perhaps is there some significant reason why it is not currently functioning in those years. We need to retune our authenticity. We need to make our, or I think from what I see with my students and having talked to them, we need to make that consequential element of the learning environment more salient to them. We have to make sure that they are connected to the consequences of the outcome of their learning. So we need to address authenticity levels, and also in the literature that can also be done. Perhaps we need to fine tune our assessments, and we maybe also need to see perhaps is our live case approach too live. But these are all things that I think will come as further parts or recommendations for further research. And then I think what we really need to do is also check whether attitude intentions are empirically indistinguishable. That is a finding that I think also, as Hans said, if we were to replicate the study in different environments with different levels of support, different socioeconomic backgrounds, and also perhaps what we didn't include in our study, which would be important for next time, is whether entrepreneurship is done out of economic necessity or is it done as a conscious or active choice. So in summary, our live cases works via EM. It does work via EM to the TBB beliefs, the theory, plan, behavior. Reflection is the reliable backbone of our educational process. Our collaborations pay off most in years 1 and 3. And authenticity is best treated as an area for further development. We develop our context. Gender is inconsistent, but shows no major departures. So we, in our environment, see males and females developing broadly along the same paths. Although the mindset, direct relationship between mindset and intention is stronger for females. So we need to also align our activities, our assessment, and our staging in order to maximize the development impact across our degree programs. Thank you very much. That is the end of my presentation. Next slide, please. Questions. If anybody has any questions, points, discussions, please feel free to add them in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, John. It was very inspiring presentation.
Thank you.
So students, this have been recorded and you'll be received it later, but you can maybe now have some questions if you want. You can put it to the chat.
Perhaps in the meantime, I have a question for you, John. Thanks for your presentation. I'm really excited. You know that.
Yes.
And for me, if I'm looking at the Center for Entrepreneurship in the Netherlands, and we're working on the entrepreneurial mindset. We put DISC and Entrepcom together already, and I really want to add this research to the same topics. But how to proceed is, of course, the findings are so interesting, and authenticity is, let's say, the main topic you find in your research, and work on that, collaboration, etc., and working on the attitude. The way to bring it into the courses we organize and to bring it in the mindset of our colleagues, lecturers, etc., that's the next step. And I really want to contribute to this effort you perhaps are going to plan in the next few months. But that's my main question. How are we going to do this effectively, and how can we motivate lecturers, colleagues, but also students to look inside these findings and bring all their effort they do on the entrepreneurial path they have chosen, but also the entrepreneurial path of the lecturers. How can we get it in? That's my main question. And of course, you can't give the answer at the moment, but that's, I think, the challenge we need to look at.
Yeah. I mean, maybe I can. I think it's, for example, very important that we obviously build this from the bottom up around students. As I say, we did quantitative studies, so the why behind why the authenticity isn't working in the way that we see in other literature, the way that it's being portrayed in our institution. I think we need to go back to the source, if you will, and investigate it from that perspective. The other thing that's really striking about that is that authenticity is often, in my understanding of the literature anyway, placed as almost like a prerequisite, almost like it is the golden standard is engagement, and students only really have impactful learning when it's truly authentic. However, we still find very strong effects for reflection and collaboration, even without strong effects for authenticity. So I think you're right, Hans. We need to find that out, because I do think that there could be exponential growth in its impact on mindset if we figure out that third lever.
Yeah.
So how to get that into the classroom, and how to see authenticity is also such a subjective thing. What you find authentic, I may not, and something that is too authentic for you might be, just up my street kind of thing. So it's a difficult one, but we're going to dive into it. We're going to do some questions.
And of course, the authenticity grows during their study program, those 4 years there at the university. I've recognized too. It's not immediately there, or they didn't discover their authenticity. That's also the case. Mm-hmm. So that perhaps makes it more difficult to work on it, but it's also very interesting. At what point can you say I'm authentic, or my ideas are authentic? Oh, this is my way of working for the future, and it has to do with the scaffolding you're talking about. Also, on what level do you make this point, this topic more important, or put more effort in it, etc. So it's really interesting to dive into this. Yeah.
I think also the creation of that gap, or closing that gap, but sometimes it comes. Sometimes I think that are we also directing the reflection aspect closely enough around the authentic nature of what students are doing? I don't know if that makes entirely a lot of sense, but our students or our teachers directing students to say, well, this has been a real experience. How was it different from another experience? So that they can close that gap between different levels of authenticity, and because authenticity is very closely in education related to uncertainty. So students generally probably don't like uncertainty, but is there the realization that uncertainty probably pushed you to act in a certain way, or to reflect in a certain way, or to collaborate in a certain way? So yeah, there's a lot of nuances there, I think, for investigation.
Okay, here is a question for you in the chat. Entrepreneurship is critical looking at the microwave of the typical economy. How can one ensure sustainability after the first 5 years of launching, especially in the production sector? Janet is asking about this.
So you're going to have to repeat the question for me.
Okay.
How do we ensure success? If I understand.
How can one ensure sustainability after the first 5 years of launching, especially in the production sector?
Okay. So first of all, let me clarify. It will obviously depend on the production sector, and I'm not overly familiar with the production sector, but I know the production sector is highly and globally competitive. So it also depends on what product you're making, and so on and so forth. But from my perspective, the thing that provides you, probably if I go back to the opening part of the presentation where I talked about you have to have near misses. I mean, if you had bought Google for 750,000 euro in 1999, you would have been a happy man today. It's near misses, lady luck. It's the uncertainty, the thing that ensures your survivability, the thing that ensures, well, not ensures, but increases your probability of success, is keeping that entrepreneurial mindset. It's keeping that adaptability, resource leveraging, creativity, all these factors. If you develop those as an individual, then the setbacks that you face, right, you should be able to, in my opinion, overcome those in a better way. It will also then look at things like grit and resilience and so on and so forth. But from my perspective, education gives you a better fighting chance to deal with any setbacks that you have. And that's what I think would push you over the line to survive. I can't comment on the industry sector, but from a global perspective, it's a bit like this. I think it was Roy Keane that said, fail to prepare, prepare to fail. That mindset is, and education and the development of mindset is your preparation. And if you are not prepared and you don't have those skill sets, then it's going to be very difficult for you to be successful, I think. I hope that answers your question.
I think so. It will be. Yes, thank you, John. And one question for me, is there already publication about your research?
No, this research, this was first presented at conference Council of Hospitality Managed Education.
Yes.
It won Best Paper Award at that conference.
Okay.
And subsequently...
Possible to get it?
Sorry, what's that?
Is it possible to get it already?
I can send you copies, or if you would like to tell me exactly. I'm in the final process of writing up the PhD. So
yes.
Once that has been approved, then we will publish. We have a series of around 4 papers, I think, that we're going to publish. Yes.
Good luck for that. Yes.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions?
Yeah, there's a new question in the chat. Yeah.
Yes. Sheila is asking, to understand reflection, is this paired with constructing quality, feedback, and direction? The quality of feedback is dependent on the skills of the educator, and the quality of feedback from experts influence the quality of the reflection and therefore progress.
Sorry, can you repeat that for me quite slowly? There's quite a few things in there. So reflection.
Yes, to understand reflection, is this paired with constructive quality, feedback, and direction?
Okay, let me answer that part first.
Yes.
In my opinion, yes. I don't think that, for example, when students, especially when they first come into the institution, should be told go away and reflect. I believe that reflection, I think in 99% of all things in life, you need to be given some guidance, and you need to be perhaps taught, for lack of a better word, how to reflect. And then once you reflect, it is about guiding you and making sure that you have set moments in a course to reflect, and the quality of the feedback of that reflection, but also does that reflection relate to what you're doing, and how do you use that reflection in what you're doing? So if you're designing a new HRM policy for a company and you reflect on it, what do you take from that reflection to make that policy better? And what feedback do you get from your industry partner and your teacher should play a very, very important role in that. So that part, I say, yes, it is contingent on how you have been taught to reflect and how you are brought along in that process up to a certain point. There will also come a certain point, I would expect, from a 3rd or 4th year student where you should be able to reflect more on your own. Okay, so that's the first part.
Okay, the second was, the quality of feedback is dependent on the skills of the educator, and the quality of feedback from experts influence the quality of the reflection and therefore progress.
Okay, first part in terms of the skills part with the lecturer, I think I answered in the first part. Relating to the experts, it depends on the role of your experts or how you define experts in your curriculum. For us, experts are conveyors of knowledge and theory. So, for example, I'm working on an HR policy for a firm. I'm doing a consultative live case with them, but I need to understand motivational theories. I go to an expert discusses with me a series of different motivational theories, I don't know, Maslow hierarchy of needs, for example. So in terms of that, yes, the expert does need to provide you with a baseline of what we call traditional knowledge. learning and teaching, whether that's related to your ability to reflect, not related to your ability to reflect, but if you base your reflection on what they tell you, the two are connected. So I'm not sure exactly how you want to position experts in that question. Perhaps that is the best I can say about that one.
Okay. Any others? Here is from Ian. Is what ways can educators assess and measure the development of an entrepreneur mindset in hospitality and tourism students?
Assess entrepreneurial mindset. Now that's entrepreneurial mindset. Yeah, this comes to back to the old constructive alignment debate. Your assessment should be reflective of your learning outcomes. So your learning outcomes should, for example, one thing I would also argue is if you're teaching a course on entrepreneurship, if we look at entrepreneurial mindset and the different factors that make up entrepreneurial mindset, so being focused and adaptable, that should be somewhere embedded in a learning outcome. And you can assess these different aspects of entrepreneurial mindset through the learning outcome if it's well aligned with your curriculum. But to answer the question, if you want to assess entrepreneurial mindset, assess it factor by factor, but the factors are different. Some are cognitive aspects. For example, you need to understand what a resource is in order to leverage it. But how do you leverage a particular resource? That's more of a behavior. So one, you can assess, for example, a student and say, do you understand what the different types of resources, human, financial, technological, so on and so forth. And you can do that through a simple test or through what we call more traditional assessment criteria. But to truly assess mindset, I think you have to sit down and talk to the student. And you have to do, I would imagine, or I would recommend, an interview based on assessing skill sets and abilities. So cognitive knowledge is the old paper and pencil test, and then really looking at reflective, like can a student explain in a reflection or reflection piece how they would do something like mobilize a resource, apply it to a different context, and then you have an interview with them in which you can perhaps delve deeper into that. So I think it's a complex process to assess mindset because you need two things. You need baseline knowledge, and then you need a certain amount of behavior and competencies. And then you need competency-based interviewing techniques as opposed to criterion-based interview effects to test particular elements of mindset. So it's a complex question. It's a good question though. How do you measure these things? It's easy to measure them in research because we have conceptualizations from others, but to measure them in students on a case-by-case basis requires a comprehensive assessment policy.
Okay, he is continue. Okay, how can hospitality and tourism curricula be redesigned to foster entrepreneurial thinking rather than operational competence alone?
Sorry, again, the first part?
How can hospitality and tourism curricula be redesigned to foster entrepreneurial thinking rather than operational competence alone?
Okay. So it would very much again be contingent on how you define entrepreneurial thinking and what you want students to develop specifically. I think you have to focus on mindset. I think you have to look at things like and mindset, the entrepreneur model. You have to design a curriculum that serves or has the ability to promote the behavioral aspects and the competency-based aspects. And that only comes through the use of live cases. That only comes through the application of knowledge. And I think you need to concentrate on curriculums that, once a certain level of basic knowledge has been attained, pushes students to apply that knowledge in a way that makes them, that they realize that they can use that knowledge to behave in particular ways, or they can use skill sets in a particular way to achieve certain goals. And then going back to the assessment part, they should be able to explain that process to you. How do they make those steps? And as a teacher, you should probably have some idea of what those steps are, so you can get them there as well. It's also context specific.
Yes. So I understand. Thank you for you. Any other questions, or do we stop today? We are continue on afternoon again.
Perhaps I can contribute to the last reaction you gave, John, because the entrepreneurial thinking is also something that you need to experience by listening to other entrepreneurs who are, for let's say, 10 or 15 years already successful or not. Because being not successful is very interesting too, but successful entrepreneurs, of course, speak more to the mind.
Yeah.
But to experience what entrepreneurial thinking is about and how several entrepreneurs do and think and act in their daily life as an entrepreneur gives you the context also for curricula in hospitality and tourism to focus on what you need to develop in your own way of working as an entrepreneur. So I think it's a very, very good question also.
Yeah.
Because we tend to bring things back to theoretical things and perhaps assessments, etc. But there's also inspirational discovery behind too.
So yeah, I also think something that you mentioned there, and we don't perhaps do it in entrepreneurial curricula enough, is you could basically have at least a portion of your course that touches on entrepreneurial failure and its value. And again, building resilience and mindset and all these other factors, which is a little bit, if I go back to how attitude in our sample was perceived as the same as intention, to me that could be a little bit worrying, that we don't realize that we are going to probably have to fail 2 or 3 times before we get where we want to be. It doesn't happen overnight. So yeah, I mean, entrepreneurship is a really, it's quite a subjective, but it's more complex than we think. But context also gives it a lot of value, and putting students into that context and watching them behave entrepreneurially or intrapreneurially, whichever, or exhibiting behaviors like creativity and adaptability and simple things such as resource mobilization, where they turn to their friend and they go, hey, your father works in I don't know, production plants. Why can't we go and ask him what these people are talking about? Small things like that, they do make a big difference. So we need to look at that as well.
Thanks.
We'll meet again.
Yeah.
14 to 16.
Well, John, of course, many thanks for your presentation, and of course the inspiration we already had, and which we are going to follow up in the next few months. And for the people who are in this Zoom meeting, again 2 o'clock we will meet Florian Maurer from Alberg, and everybody is welcome, of course. And if you like to join, John, you're most welcome too. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.